2, 1. I think I'm live. Hey, welcome everybody. Sorry I'm late. Um, to be honest, tonight is the San Jose Giants versus the Stockton Ports. Can't be in two places at once, so I had to shift the time. You'll pardon me. Always remember you can always see these on my YouTube channel. So let's kind of dive right in and start doing this thing. So started a series interested in your Cisco Voip deployments, how to make it successful, and this is from the perspective of an infrastructure engineer. So you're not figuring out ACD queues, whether you're going to add PRIs or DIDs, or you're going to bring in SIP on fiber. That's for the telecom side to figure out. This is building that infrastructure that's going to ride across. So today we're going to talk about IP schemes, which doesn't seem all that particularly exciting, but it is important. A couple of notes to start with, that specific brands and models are for illustration purposes only. They do not imply any endorsement by the vendor in any way. So no, I'm not endorsed by Cisco or whoever else, right? This is based on my experience. Okay. I only include equipment that I have experience with. This is my own work. It does not represent the process or views of any employer or client, past or present. At the time of writing, I have not received any compensation or inducement from any vendor. I am a network infrastructure engineer, so I will not be speaking to planning ACD queues, designing numbering plans, all that good stuff. Right? Voice over IP, that's where voice over internet protocol, right? This is what we're talking about. Now, certainly what I'm doing here can apply to lots of things, even just planning a new campus, right? But this happens to be inside the context of talking about VoIP. So we're going to plan all the IP ranges, set up the DHCP scopes, plan for VLAN numbers, make sure all the DHCP options are properly configured, right? Given that all my eggs are in one basket, how can I prepare my network to be as robust as the typical telephone network, right? And I always like to just mention these triple constraints: time, quality, money. You change one, you're going to affect at least one other, if not both. So just as we kind of walk through this thing of, hey, I need to crash, get this thing done faster. Well, you need to spend more money because now you have to have consultants, or you need to be working nights and weekends. So, or you may need to bring in outside consultants to do sort of your regular day job while you focus on this project. So just wanted to make sure we keep that in mind. And here's why I think this is such a serious issue. With a traditional phone system, there's always a dial tone. You pick up the phone, you get a dial tone. And the calls are always clear and intelligible. That wasn't how it was 70 years ago, but you say in the last 3 decades, yeah, the hardwired phone, you pick it up, it's clear, always. There are some regulatory requirements for enhanced 911 services, 999 in the UK. This is your emergency services. Person picks up that phone, they dial the emergency number, that it's clear where this call is coming from. Okay. Certainly, deploying VoIP, we don't want to negatively impact our data networks. So you have great call quality and everyone's screaming because they can get their work done because you've now messed up the data network would be a bad thing. So getting a little more specific onto at least my understanding of the current requirements in California is for every floor or suite, if appropriate, in a building, we have a distinct IP range in VLAN. Now, yes, there are other ways to go about this. In Call Manager, to be able to define, to say this particular IP range belongs to this particular floor building is a lot easier way rather than having to associate particular phones to particular addresses. So That's so. I like to say in meetings, hey, Johnny Lawman gets called, there's an emergency, that he's not breaking down the wrong door. He's breaking down the right door because you're sending the right E911 information. So that's important, which gives us some context for what we're doing. Okay, and from the last part, I had a to-do list for you. So I asked you, what standards do you need to document before the deployment can begin? And actually, next week I want to talk about quality. So not quality of service, but quality in the broadest sense. And this is actually a really important piece of it. Your hardware list. Do you have the hardware you need to provide redundancy, spares, add capacity, replace end-of-life equipment as part of the project? Did you get it funded? Did you create a list of all the rooms that you need to clean up, add AC, add additional power, cabling, whatever you got to do so that you know what work you have to get going on? Do you have a list of devices that need code upgrades? Do you have a list of devices needing any additional configuration? And that could be just as basic as applying Cisco's basic auto quality of service. And we'll do a session on quality of service. So hopefully your deadline isn't the end of June, as we won't get through with all these talks before the end of June. But certainly if you're picking this up months from now after we've got a lot more of these sessions done, binge watch. Yeah. Now the closets that will need to be repatched to facilitate E911, and what I meant by that is I've got a closet that services more than one floor, suite, whatever it is that would break this E911 requirement, and you've got cables all jumbled across the blades or stack members, so it's not clear what port belongs to what floor. So you have that list of the floor of the closets you need to do repatching work. Right, so that was your homework. That's a lot. I get it. That's why this takes a while. Okay, for this, so we want a distinct IP scope for each floor suite per address, and I mean physical address, mailing address, street address, whatever you want to call it. 123 Main Street. So I know that second floor, 123 Main, here's this scope, third floor is this, right? And now we've been told that, or at least I was told, for wireless phones, I can send out the building, because obviously when I have a wireless phone, they can pick up a WAP on a floor above or below, as well as one on the current floor. So making that kind of distinction isn't necessarily helpful. I talked about during training to make sure when you're distributing those wireless phones, they know that the police aren't going to be as clear where they are. They're going to need to tell the 911 dispatcher more about where they are if they're calling from one of those phones versus a desk phone. Okay? Now, sizing. Sizing. I know people who are like, hey, I got 28 addresses. I'm going to give a scope 30 addresses. That'll be fine. Yeah, and then somebody decides to rip down the cube walls, double everything up, so now there's twice as many people, you need twice as many phones. Yeah, you got to redo your scopes. It's private address space, use it. Don't do 14 available addresses to handle 12 phones. I would do 30, right? So I have room for growth. Or if it's big shell space, we're only using a small piece of it for that floor, and the rest of it is our space. It's not doesn't belong to other tenants. Yeah, have a big scope in there. Have like a /24. Okay. Gather the IPs for your TFTP server. So when you're creating these DHCP scopes, that's one of the things you do. Is there's the TFTP server is how the phones get their configuration as they go to a TFTP server, and that's in there. That's one of the DHCP options. Make sure the DHCP servers are redundant. Oh, that was the first episode of my whole Tech Talk series, was just to talk about redundancy, because you've got something serious now, and I have if I have my only DHCP server blow out, great. Now I can't reboot a phone. I can't plug in a new phone, or if it's down long enough, I've got these phones dropping into their losing their IP addresses because they've now hit 100. 50% of their scope time, of their lease time, so that they have to give their address back. So redundancy is important. And this is the kind of thing that really is embarrassing when you have a failure. And part of the analysis I did is I wanted to get a sense of the ratio of phones per active network port. So the reason I wanted to know this is for deciding how big the scope needed to be for the VoIP VLAN. And I preferred not to create multiple VLANs. So if I had 2 user VLANs, they're all the same floor, same suite, just to have one voice VLAN for ease and consistency, rather than creating 2 to match the 2 user VLANs. So one of the ways I was able to do that is I can analyze my existing sites. So I did a show CDP neighbor, count phone, or whatever distinguishing for the other vendor, right? So it's replacing some other vendors' VoIP phone. So they did show up in CDP. So I was able to figure that out. I also can I can also do things like show power inline include on, right, and take out the count on, and then do another count to take out the APs and other devices. So even if they're not showing up, if they're getting PoE from my switch, there's a lot of different ways to figure out about how many phones I have. Worst case, you're counting. Fine, that's what it comes to. Then I did show interface description count up. So there's a few extra things in there, like VLAN interfaces. I need to subtract that out. Divide the number of phones divided by the total number of active ports, multiply by 100, I get a percentage, right? Now, there's an assumption these sites are typical. And the more sites I was able to gather, the more closets, the more sites, the better I'm able to estimate both the range of values and the mean value. So if I have 2 data 22/24s to cover my data needs, if I'm running 50% for voice, a single /24 should cover me for voice. I'm gonna say one extra thing about that. Typically, I've been leaving more space available for static addresses on my data VLANs because I have printers and other devices. For VoIP, there really isn't any. There are some occasional exceptions, but for the most part, we just don't. All the phones are DHCP. There's no reason for static. There's no, other than the VLAN interface itself, there's no devices that all the phones need to talk to directly. So there's no sort of server or anything else in there. So while I'll reserve the first 63 out of a /24 for static on a data VLAN, I'll reserve the first 15, 1 through 15, 16 actually, but for static on VoIP, and I rarely ever use them, rarely. Okay. Now, I can just make some estimates if I don't have anything to analyze with. And so it's kind of good, again, to get out in the field, take a look around. In the healthcare side, there are things like exam rooms that now have PCs because we're mostly doing electronic health records. So they need a PC for the doctor and the medical assistant to go in and, put in your weight, order up your prescriptions, take notes from the encounter, do all that kind of good stuff they do on the computer, but they don't put a phone in there anymore. The older ones used to have phones around, but I don't see them as much anymore. So that helps that ratio. But as you take a walk around, you're also looking for things like wall phones that you're not going to deploy a phone probably attached to network scanners, printers, multifunctions, building management systems. There's a lot of different devices. So it's unlikely to be a 1-for-1. A small call center may be close to 1-for-1, since there isn't necessarily that much infrastructure, and typically a call center, they have a PC for their order taking, whatever, logging the call, whatever they need to do for their computer, and then the phone. So, and look around you, have other rooms with network devices but no phones. So somehow or another figure out about an estimate just so you size your scopes right. So for looking at this Catalyst 4510s, 9410s, I do a lot of them. That's why I mentioned it, 384 ports when you have all the blades. Typically, I put in about 2/24s for data VLANs and a single. Now, I could do it as a single /23. That in that 50-60% range, particularly because I've saved some. I don't have as many static set aside for on the voice VLANs, that the single /24 will cover me in that scenario. So yeah, and of course, right, you really don't do static addresses on your voice scopes. Okay. When you're building the option, when you're building out that scope, you've got to add this option 150, which is a standard option in DHCP, the TFTP servers. And again, hope it's redundant, right? That you have a primary and a secondary. Hopefully they're not in the same rack, at the same place, so that a power outage, a top of rack server breaking something doesn't take this thing down. Now, obviously, when you're small enough, if you're doing this in a a single office, single floor, yeah, well, you may not have all that much redundancy. But if you can you get them at least separate? They're going to different top of rack switches, something, right? And even your wireless need to have this TFTP server information. So it'll go on all your scopes. This is going to be a bit of a shorter talk than some of the other ones. Okay. And I can show you a bit. Let me pull up. I'm going to show you two things, actually. One of them, this is the template I was using in the last session when I talked about creating this list. So I created a spreadsheet. As I said, I dumped the data from HP network automation, but there's a lot of different places you can get inventory. I had to add a few things. So the site code, a physical address, floor and suite, that's all information that I'm typing in. City, right? Maybe state if you cross state lines. Host name, this is where the information is started. Then this is why some of the headers are named as they are. So as you see, hopefully you're seeing my slide. Let's see if I can. I don't know what you're seeing. You're supposed to see. I'm going to end the slideshow for a second. Let's see. Okay. Good, you're seeing that. Let me make sure you can see what you can see. Sorry, when you have the slideshow part of PowerPoint up, I can't see what you're seeing. Okay, so here we go. Here are the pieces: host name, device IPs, and why is that not scrolling? Okay, that's cute. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Oh, that's why. Right, I have it locked. So host name, device IP, software versions, device model, right? Some of these categories, change date, that came directly out of network automation. I added a column for supervisor version because when I first started this project many years ago, I had up to I think 4 or 5 different types of supervisors. So I wanted to track, okay, the chassis is good, but the supervisors are old. Let's put in some new soups for this project, right? And then I talked about whether the device was compliant. So using network automation, that told me that based on the scripts that were running to check the configuration that yes, it has all the right logging hosts and all those good things to them, and I could check that off as yes or no. If it was a no, that meant that was work for me. I needed to go back and fix that, right? Multicast. Unfortunately, multicast didn't allow me to do a real simple like remote test. I was logging into devices, taking a look, making sure everything was configured correctly, right? Quality of service. Do we have that configured? The policies there, right? So you see these different categories. I'm going to find a nice place to share this with you. And just tracking the power and UPS. If there's any licensing issues I needed to deal with. A lot of cases I needed to have IP services. So I needed to track that. And is it a converged router? Does it have all these PVDMs, T1 modules, whatever we need? So this is the one spreadsheet. Now for IP, let's show you the other. This one, scrolling in here, good, you can see this. This one actually started as an audit due to some problems, so I started working with this. But so a site ID again, an address for a suite city. This all sounds familiar. Great. What's the IP range? And I would describe it as something like, 10.10.10.0/24, standard nomenclature, right? Defined range. So this is kind of giving directions as my server guys were the ones actually creating the ranges. Yeah, I want to go 1 to 254 for this, right? Make sure I'm really clear with what they need to deliver. If I'm not clear and they don't, and I end up getting something that I don't want, that's my fault, not theirs. Now, if I've gone through and defined all this is why I want to talk about quality next week. If I've gone through and defined this, that's when I get to go, this is wrong, this needs to be redone. I've been very clear about what the requirements are. Let's actually go into this. Here's a better looking version of it. And then I created some lookup fields to say whether it was new, whether it was existing. Existing, once I validated that it's been created, I would swap the status to existing, modify, or it's delete. Deletes, sometimes when you're looking through all these old scopes, you find stuff for buildings you vacated years ago. Clean those up, get rid of them, right? And then the type, this type field was there. So it helps me in defining how I want to do the exclusions. And it also just is also a way for, I could hand this spreadsheet off to the guys working on call manager. They can do a sort for the field VoIP. They're going to be looking, they're going to pick up all the VoIP scopes. So that's going to help them find, okay, this IP range belongs to this address on this floor. They put that in for their enhanced 911. Everything's great. And I spell out the mask, even though I put it as /24 when I define the range, I redo it because you know what? Some of us have gone through endless training on subnetting and some haven't. So when they see /24, it doesn't mean anything to them. So when I type in 255.255.255.0, they understand what I'm doing, and they can deliver the right thing. What's the gateway address? When you're new, subnetting, well, .1's always the gateway. No, the gateway is an arbitrary thing you pick. So let's be clear. And particularly if I'm subnetting into smaller chunks, /25, /26. So now I need to, .1 can't be the gateway for all of them. It won't work. .129, .60, .65, these other numbers these guys are not as quite as familiar with, make sure it's in there. Typically in your DHCP, you can override DNS servers, DNS suffix, WIN servers. I try not to do that unless there's a good reason. But as part of the original audit, these fields were there, so that's why they're listed this way. DHCP servers, redundant, so there's 2 of them. Hey, look at that. Server 1, server 2 exclusions. So if you haven't used the failover that's Microsoft added to their DHCP servers a couple of versions ago, but if you're still running on a really old version of Windows, well, let's hope you don't. And you're doing this two servers doing non-overlapping exclusions, that this is where you distinguish what they are. If they're in that failover pair, I'm just going to say, hey, for my VoIP scopes, if I'm doing a /24, exclude 1 to 15 and do it twice. The SCCM server is not relevant to a VoIP. That's for your data. That's your Microsoft Operations Manager, right? You put that in as a helper. And this actually is good too, by putting in these two fields, the two DHCP server fields, as you go through and you go and deploy these VoIP VLANs out in the field, you know the helper addresses you need to put in are these two IPs here. And then if it's data, you're going to add that SCCM server, right? I had a bunch of fields for adding the Cisco options for the Cisco wireless, which is not relevant to your voice scopes. You're not putting your APs on the voice VLANs, right? But these last two are. So if this was filled out, you'd see I'd have a lot of NAs and all this fields, right? And then the VLAN number, the interface location, so that's where I'm going to deploy this VLAN interface, so the host name of that network device. Description, right? Make a description that makes sense, that is consistent for organization. So I might have 123 main, second floor, VoIP. That's a good description. It tells you the building. If you had like a site code, so for Springfield is like spring. So and it's the first site, so Spring 001. And then include the address 123 main, second floor, VoIP. That can be great, right? And then another lookup field. And this was more of a flag for me, whether it's in use. So I've got devices on it. It's in production. Has it been configured but not in use? No, I've done nothing with it. A pending delete or a pending turn up. And then a place for notes. So this is where, and I wrote a set of instructions to go with this thing. So how am I color coding? Because I'd actually, when I had a new scope, I'd use a green fill to make it really clear. This is something new. A yellow fill says, hey, you got to fix something in here. Something's changed. A red for delete. And then a purple was, I put in a flag, hey, we're going to be closing something soon. These are pending deletes, but I'll let you know when they're ready to go. This is also for me to go back. I should be clearing my purples. I shouldn't have a purple that's been sitting for a year or two. That's not, it's like a rug store, right? It seems like every rug store you go by always has a sign going out of business. But you've always been going out of business. So, and then I used red to show this was an incorrect value, black, bolded, underlined to show this is the correct one. Strike through is delete text. So I created a nice set of and field definitions for everything. So here's a set of instructions. When I shared this with the server team, I sent them the directions. I included it in this in the spreadsheets. There was lots of ways for them to check and make sure they understood, and they could contact me directly. This is to try and make this a very useful document. So let's pull back into the slides. So this is what you're creating, and let's go. Sorry, kids. Let's go back to where we were. Okay, so picking your ISP space. Two different schools of thought on this one. So one of them says, put all the phone, when I pick, and we're working in private address space, right? If anyone's working in public address space, you're crazy. Where'd you get all those IP addresses? You pick one block and you start dividing all your phones across your entire enterprise. So what happens if I'm looking in something like NetFlow, or I'm looking in a packet capture, and I see something starting with 10.110, I know that's some sort of VoIP related something, right? It could be the router in between, right? But more than likely that's phone traffic. So um, that's one way to do it. Now, the other thought is uh, you can have it, so if I want to do summaries, so I'm trying to reduce my route tables, I can pick a range out of the whole campus. And particularly if it's a layer 2 campus, that would make sense, right? So I have some range that a contiguous range. I'll pick all those IPs and divide up that block. So the example there is 10.20.192.0/19. So I've got a lot of, I can divide it up into a lot of subnets for my phones. And if I have fairly consistent campuses, I may be able to tell again, just by looking at it, I see something coming through on say 10.25.193. something. I'm like, oh, it's a phone range. And gee, I remember that's, this campus in, Albany, right? Fine. There we go. The idea is with all this is to make it easy for something to pop out and distinguish itself. The other way, if you're doing layer 3 closets, so each closet is its own separate layer 3, that I'm going to pick part of the range and I'm going to do it in a consistent manner. So I look at the campus, and so this particular closet has this particular range. So I divided up. I had it 2/24s for my users. Talked about that earlier. I have a /24 for voice, put it down at the bottom, and I have another one which has other uses. Maybe that's where I put all my building management, other devices that may have different security requirements. So I have another range to play with. Okay. Now picking VLAN numbers. Why do I even care? Well, again, it tries to make this thing easy, so as you go look at a config, you know that things are right or not. So one of them is to mirror the octets. So 10.20.10.0 /24, that'll be my VLAN 10. Now, if I chose that one where I said, hey, I'm going to have that range 10.110 is going to be for everything in there is going to be voice. Well, now I have a, no, I mistyped that. I should put 10.110.10.0/24. Okay, so who gets to choose to be VLAN 10 in that case, right? I don't like it as much, and it doesn't necessarily, it is a good signal. It tells me I can marry up the IP range to a VLAN fairly, if I've done that consistently. So I see 10.20.5.0, hey, that should be VLAN 5. There it is. Or I see VLAN 5, I'm like, hey, and I'm on the right campus, 10.20.5.0. Okay. Now, one of the things I've liked in these layer 3 closets, okay, keeping the VLAN numbers consistent across all the closets. Now, if you ever go to convert it to a layer 2 campus, you got problems. It's going to be a lot tougher because now you have to change the VLAN number on every single port. Okay. Yeah. So this, and when I look at a port config, if I see switch port access VLAN 40, switch port voice VLAN 70, that's just standard. I just look at that, I'm like, oh, that's user 1, and and he's got the right voice VLAN attached to it. End of story. I can look at a port config and I go, that's right. If it said something like voice VLAN 40, I'm like, hey, no, that's not the right thing. Somebody fat fingered that. Something's wrong. I can go fix that. Now I have an asterisk, and I'll explain that in a second. Now for layer 2 campuses, hey, I can do this thing where I take a range, and for some reason we pick 7s, or I pick 7s, or somebody picks 7s, but okay, I can take the 700 VLANs. Okay, 700 is going to be for my MDF or server room, because that's often different. There's kind of core infrastructure there. If I have also a user switch in there, I'm going to put that on a different VLAN. The users I'm going to move off into different VLAN, and I'm going to describe things. So 710 would be this campus, building 1, whatever that is, in the basement. 711 first floor, 723 would be building 2 third floor, and like that. So it's just for a way. So I log into the switch in building 2. I'm on the 3rd floor, and I see switchport voice VLAN 711. I'm like, whoa, that's wrong. That's bad. That phone now is going to send out the wrong enhanced 911 information. I can look at it right away because of that signal. I don't have to go back, and then I see, okay, it's VLAN 113. Okay, 113. And I go back, yeah, because that's 10.110.113.0. And then I go back to the core, I look at that VLAN, and I see what the description is. Or I have to go in, if I've named all my VLANs and I'm running VTP, so I make sure that that VLAN information is distributed throughout the campus, I go show VLAN, I see, okay, name, okay, yeah, 113 is right for this. But if I do a system like this, it's immediately obvious. I don't have to do a second reference to anything else, as long as I understand the campus. Obviously, if I don't understand I'm in building 2 right now, I got a different problem. So somehow in this switch naming, you want to make it's good to do that. Now, this note. So even this layer 3 closet, I can have this interesting problem where because of the way the building's built, I'm servicing more than one floor. So yeah, VLAN 70 was for the floor I'm on, wherever that switch is, and then I would do something like, say, 72 for the 2nd floor. So I'm on the 1st floor, or in this case, I said I was on the 3rd floor, but I'm also servicing the floor below. Everything on that 2nd floor, I'll mark as VLAN 72, and I'll name it that way, so I'm clear what these are. So a description in the VLAN interface, and also I'll name the VLAN, so I'll see that the VLAN 70 says VoIP underscore, like 2nd floor. VLAN 72 says VoIP, or 3rd floor, sorry, and VoIP 70, VLAN 72 says name VoIP underscore 2nd floor, right? Just to make things simple. So, all right, get to work. You got a lot to do. I just made your list longer, right? So start building a spreadsheet. Why? So you can track that they get done, and also something you can hand off to your voice guys that are programming that enhanced 911 information, so that they know it is. Or of course, you may be smaller. You're building the scopes yourself, and even if you're building yourself, at least you have this list, right? And you have a reference of, this is what I did. If you later on start to fat finger things, hey, you know what you started, you can go back to your document, right? Best to have someone validate your work. This is a lot of tedium. You're doing it across hundreds of closets, building hundreds of scopes, easy to make mistakes, all kinds of mistakes. Create the VLANs where needed, create the VLAN interfaces where needed, add the voice VLANs to the appropriate end user ports, and you may, again, we go back to that point, you may need to redo some cabling, because if I've got a closet that services multiple floors, multiple suites, something where I need to distinguish for 911 services, emergency services, where this phone is, yeah, I may need to go back in there and do some repatching, so I'm really clear that blades 9 and 10 are, suite 100, 8 and 7 are suite 120, and so on, right? So, but at least you can have everything created, and then once you've got everything all straightened, the cabling all straightened out, you can add those voice VLANs. In this series, we're going to go over the configuration steps. Don't worry, this is still pre-work. You haven't touched a switch yet, really, other than to look at them. Okay, well, I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can see these on a regular basis. You can binge watch. You can review things. It's awesome. Of course, I say that. You can follow me on Facebook. I have the follow feature turned on, so I'm not necessarily accepting all the friend requests. It is still somewhat personal, but this is me. So if we're not friends now, follow, but you can send a friend request. I'm not responding to all of them on purpose. Sometimes I'm just busy. You can follow me on Twitter. I do post when I'm doing this on Twitter. And also, I put up the links to the talks, so if you missed it, you also can follow. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, and I post to LinkedIn the slides before the before I do a talk, and also to remind you when talks are coming. And feel free to suggest topics and comments on any of these channels, right? Or certainly feel free to ask questions. Again, thanks for and slideshow. Thanks for showing up today. Appreciate my friends who check this out, and tell friends, right? If you see, if you follow me on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, or you can share the next invite with your friends if you think this will be interesting to them. As I said, next week I want to start talking about quality, and it's an important topic, right? You want to keep your job, do a good job, and there's a framework for that. It isn't just I show up on time and I always do the right thing. There's more. There's a more serious framework that goes around this. So thank you for showing up, and I hope to see you next time.